In 2017, we embarked on an ambitious project to reinvigorate the discussion of concentration and monopoly in the United States, launching an annual conference on antitrust and competition. This year, we invited scholars to propose alternatives to the consumer welfare standard.
I believe many people in this room would agree that free markets are the best mechanism to improve people's lives. Yet free markets need sound antitrust policy, and a sound global antitrust policy needs the US pushing us forwards, not backwards.
Consumer welfare is the existing legal standard for assessing monopoly harm in the US. It traditionally looks at the effect of competition on prices and output. But, as the name suggests, consumer welfare is a standard with a lot of room for interpretation. Regarding the consumer welfare standard, it seems that, as was stated at last year's conference, both economists and law scholars have decided to move on from its use, or at least the use of the terminology.
Okay, so I agree with Tim and others who have said it's a good time to abandon the phrase consumer welfare because it's not just about consumers and it's not just about a standard. But don't deceive yourself that it solves a problem because it's not specified as to what is anti-competitive.
I also have already written about moving along from the term. I like the protecting competition standard, but that's, I think the consumer welfare standard is partly confusing because what about labor or input suppliers are not there?
There was considerable debate about what should replace the consumer welfare standard, with proposals ranging from measures of concentration to profit margins. We also discussed whether courts are expected to be part of the movement to increase enforcement or defenders of the status quo.
I don't want to accept the premise that there is under-enforcement. It is very difficult to know the optimal amount of enforcement. And it's not clear. I'm perfectly free to recommend other people to do empirical studies to figure out whether more or less would be helpful, and if so, in what part of the law.
I worry about under-enforcement, and I think, as I said earlier, our move away from the kind of rough, at least presumptions that this set of things are not troublesome because there's no market power, and this other set of things you need to look at much more carefully. Maybe attach quick looks or per se rules or whatever to them. I think that would help.
Instead of consumer prices, Eric Posner, a professor at the University of Chicago Law School, said courts should focus on margins when evaluating mergers, as they are a better indicator of market power. This led to a healthy exchange with Carl Shapiro on the upsides and downsides of this model vis-a-vis the present standards.
There was an increase in competition. You can't have an increase in competition when there's a monopoly. That doesn't make any sense.
The lines drawn over how to proceed reflect a similar debate as to that which is happening in corporate governance. As pointed out by Chicago Booth economist and our faculty director, Luigi Zingales. To what degree should non-monetary values, such as political power and environmental concerns, be considered?
I love economics. I think economists have a lot to contribute to the conversation for their expertise. But one thing that they should not do is substitute their expertise for values. In a democracy, who gives values is the people in this Congress, not us, not the lawyers, not anybody else.
Tim Wu, who recently wrapped up a position as Special Assistant to the President for Technology and Competition Policy, used the analogy of turning the aircraft carrier away from the last 40 years of under-enforcement.
I think that the thing that got the president, in fact, so into antitrust was the sense that it was going to be important for workers as well as for consumers.
One strength of this year's conference was its focus on proposing solutions to the concentration problem. To this effect, Nobel laureate and Harvard economist Oliver Hart proposed one of the most provocative questions of the conference. What can companies do via a merger that can't be accomplished via contracts? Chicago Booth economist Chad Syverson raised the question of how much increased concentration has actually quantitatively harmed the economy.
And I think a lot of the really broad productivity effects come from general purpose technologies. And here, I'm not so sure antitrust has much effect on the diffusion and adoption of general purpose technologies. Did it affect how quickly we electrified the economy in the early 20th century, how quickly computers were adopted, or looking forward, AI, which I think is the next general purpose technology. Do we think we're going to dial up and down how quickly AI diffuses with antitrust policy? I am skeptical about that as well.
All proposed alternatives to the consumer welfare standard that were presented at the conference can be found on promarket.org. We look forward to continuing our conversations on nailing down the importance of antitrust for the public. Please join us for our conference next year on April 18th and 19th, 2024.
The panel that was in the evening led by Filippo with the two judges was really an example of what intellectual discussion is. And in a world where intellectual discussion is disappearing because we throw things at each other and we cancel each other when we open our mouth, I think that this is really inspiring. I think that this is what Chicago is.